Red Polly.
Dusty.
Blue Poncho.
Tupac.
Street.
Hey, Wilson Hoosier. Hey, Elvis.
Dre.
Go.
All right, everyone, here we go. Getting into that last part of the regular NFL season, episode 15, week 12 recap. Take it away, Tyler.
Yeah, Doc. Well, I hope everyone had a good Thanksgiving. Unfortunately, we doing our injury roundup here, and Jalen Phillips had a big injury in the Dolphins game, tore his Achilles. Doc, another Achilles tear in the NFL. This seems like an epidemic at this point. What are your thoughts on all these Achilles tears? Why are they happening this year?
Yeah, it's the Achilles is a tough one. It's a really important muscle and tendon unit for those in the NFL, and obviously a lot of attention, Tyler, on the Achilles unit, as you can see. It's really important. It attaches to the calcaneus. You have a long tendon unit. They need a long muscle. There's an area of relative avascularity, meaning there's not a ton of blood supply where the tendon comes into the muscle right here at a tendon. And this is an area about 4, 5, 6 centimeters above your heel bone where that vascular supply isn't good. And so if you have irritation during the season, if you have some strains, you may not have even had anything. You might not have had an issue with it, but some of it has to do with how tight the muscles are, how they perform, how your overall body mechanics are. So definitely something for the teams to look at heading into the rest of the season, but also really the offseason where you can do a huge program. The Patriots, we instituted a really big program that looked at the muscle conditioning, the length, the stretching. We used a lot of testing parameters for that to make sure our players' muscles were as flexible as possible so that you didn't have these tight, irritated muscle tendon units.
Yeah, moving on, we had Cleveland Browns wide receiver Amari Cooper. He ended up leaving the game with a rib injury. His x-rays ended up coming back negative. Doc, when the x-rays are negative on a rib injury, but they still couldn't finish the game, where's your mind going?
Yeah, Predictors data shows you miss on average 1.2 games with an injury like this, especially for a wide receiver. He's got to be able to, though, stretch, turn, pivot, look back and catch the pass, look forward and catch a pass, do all the turning things wide receivers do. So that core strength is really important for a wide receiver. Great news that the ribs aren't fractures. That would almost triple the time he's potentially out. We may see Amari back even next week. Just depends on how sore he is from a pretty big hit that he took in that game.
Yeah, it's tough for the Browns. They had a lot of injuries this past game. Their banged up score is definitely going to be decreasing over this week. As we move on, yet another quarterback injury. Baker Mayfield injured his ankle in the first quarter. Now, he was able to come back, finish the game, but he is getting an MRI today to take a look at that. Doc, I have to think it probably wasn't a high ankle considering he came back. He played through it, but that doesn't mean that it's not severe or that it won't even miss a couple games. But what are you thinking on that?
Yeah, I'm thinking probably some outer ligaments sprain, could have some mild inner sprain components as you can injure the ankle joint around the back of the capsule as well with that twisting rotation mechanism that happened to Baker. So we'll see how it goes. MRI, I think, is just more precautionary just to make sure you're checking the syndesmosis, which is these ligaments between the tibia and the fibula, and also to see the extent of any medial or inner side damage. That's the key, what's called the deltoid ligament right here. And that's what we're really looking for to check the stability overall of his ankle and assess return to play.
Yeah, it's tough for Baker, but glad he was able to come out and finish the game. The Browns defensive end, Myles Garrett, he had a shoulder injury yesterday. He said that he felt a pop in his shoulder, but nothing specific. He was seen in a sling during his post-game interviews. Doc, you're the shoulder expert. What are you thinking with this pop?
Yeah, Ryan, you're always concerned about a pop. What's a pop in the shoulder? What does it mean? There's many different structures that can happen. But typically for an NFL player, what we're worried about is the ball and socket joint shifting. And you can see it will shift here, the ball and socket. And then what you end up injuring is labrum or capsule tissue. And it just feels like it almost pops out of joint. We'll look at the reports. And obviously the biggest thing we need here is examination and MRI to see what his overall shoulder looks like. Just depending on how he's doing or type of injury, a lot of times we can allow the player to rehab over 1 to 2 weeks. Maybe they missed a short amount of time, right around 10 to 14 days, the average. If you injure your labrum and it's not a fracture like Deshaun Watson had of the glenoid, when you have a bony component to it, and that's why it's important to get imaging, then you need surgery earlier because the outcomes are just better.
Yeah, we hope he can get back on the field and really be an absolute force to be reckoned with on that Browns defense. Then,
right.
Yeah, moving on to our concussion protocol for Week 12. Saints wide receiver Chris Olave and Juwan Johnson both went into protocol. Now, Olave's had a number of concussions over these past few seasons. Yeah, Browns quarterback Dorian Thompson-Robinson went into the concussion protocol, as well as Patriots wide receiver Demario Douglas. And keep checking back with the predictors.com for more updates throughout the week on all your favorite players and for your fantasy team and all your bets.
Excellent. Well, let's dive into our fantasy players coming off of injury. These are guys who are either coming off of IR or who are questionable going into this week. We can start it off with Rams running back Kyren Williams, who has been on IR with that ankle injury, came off and went off for 38 points in your PPR leagues. He had 16 rushes for 143 yards, 6 receptions for 61 yards, and 2 touchdowns. So quite the day for the Rams running back. Hopefully you weren't playing against him and actually had him on your roster. Who else do you have, Ryan?
Yeah, I got Seahawks quarterback Geno Smith, who had that elbow triceps, I believe they called it triceps contusion, but he had that injury last week that knocked him out for a good portion of that game. He came back this week. Doc was thinking he'd be down roughly about 5 to 10% in his production, have difficulty throwing the long ball over 25 yards. He ended up only having 8 points, went 18 for 27, only for 180 yards. So, Doc, you're pretty spot on. He averages about 13 points a game, so almost exactly where we expect him to be.
Yeah, Ryan, that's why I work the triceps out so much. It's just you need that snap, you need the force, you need the strength. And if you have enough of an injury to be listed on the report, we're getting bruised and banged up all the time. But if you had every bruise on the injury report, there'd be way more players on the injury report. So to be significant enough and be on the injury report, the team obviously needs to do the right thing so they don't get in trouble. I mean, obviously the NFL is investigating Joe Burrow and the Bengals and with his wrist thing and see if he had that injury and it wasn't reported. All that stuff that goes on. It's super important to be, transparent and honest about these injuries. But there's a lot of bruises in the league that don't get reported at the end of the day. This one is contusion or bruise of the muscle was reported, means significant enough. And that's why Geno didn't perform at his level. It was reported. And triceps is important for that arm snap, that extension, and the ability to get that long ball.
Yeah, I'm going to stick with the Rams. Looking at wide receiver Cooper Kupp, Kyren Williams, thank God for the Rams, he went off because Cooper Kupp has still been dealing with that ankle injury. Doc, I know we've talked about this ankle injury a lot. He had the high ankle, then he had the hamstring, and then he injured that same ankle, low ankle, but is able to play on it. But 3 receptions, 18 yards, only 4 points for him. He's clearly still dealing with this ankle.
Yeah, Tyler, as predicted. I mean, we predicted this as the predictors. You got ankle, you got hamstring, you got a hamstring, then an ankle. They go together. Lower extremity injuries, especially after a hammy and what he's had before, go together. We knew this was going to be a tough recovery for Cooper. And unfortunately, 4 fantasy points later, this past weekend, he's a much better player than that when we've seen him. And he's proven that. He's really good. But these injuries go together. It's a big problem. I think he's going to have a tough rest of the season, maybe last few games, depending what's going on with the Rams playoff situation. But I think he's got another 3-4 weeks to really come back and see the real Cooper Kupp again.
Yeah, he's a real important piece to that Rams offense out in LA. And moving on, we got Texas running back Dameon Pierce. He had an ankle injury that caused him to miss 3 games. He only put up 2.8 points on 5 carries for 14 yards. He had a pretty tough year. Last year too. He had a high ankle that knocked him out for the rest of the season. Now he just has another ankle injury during week 8, knocked him out a few weeks. And Doc, what do you think here?
Yeah, unfortunately, this is health matters for the Texans. They were close. Didn't quite get it. The field goal off the crossbar at the end of the game. But honestly, they should have been much better. And Dameon Pierce was a big factor in that issue because they're banged up. They lost their running back at the level they needed, and that definitely affected the outcome of this game.
And speaking of banged up running backs, Packers A.J. Dillon, he went in with a groin injury. It wasn't talked too much about, mainly because the big story was behind Aaron Jones being out for the game. A.J. Dillon, they had to kind of rely on him. He ended up with 11 points, 14 rushes for 43 yards, 2 receptions for 38 yards. Luckily for the Packers, Jordan Love really showed up and was able to get that win against Detroit on Thanksgiving Day.
Yeah, no question. That was a great game where the Packers really came out and showed up, and I'm not sure a lot of people expected that, but they did a great job despite AJ Dillon's situation. Again, their running back position's good and important for the team, but fortunately they've got some depth. Well, everyone, check all this out. It changes rapidly. You can see how health matters in just a few of these key players, RB1s, QB1s, linebacker ones, and certainly the offensive defensive line. We get it all broken down for you. Check it out at thepredictors.com.
All right. And looking ahead towards some injury games coming up this week, some banged up teams. Let's start with the Saints and Lions. Derek Carr is back for the Saints this past week, but now he has 2 wide receivers out with concussions, as Ryan mentioned earlier. But the Lions, their secondary has been banged up with C.J. Gardner-Johnson out and Mosley out. So this is kind of becoming a more even matchup, I guess. Ryan, Doc, what are your thoughts on this game? Who do you like?
Yeah, it's a tough game. Tough game to honestly look at. Right now, the Saints have a bus score of 78.9. The Lions have a 76.1. Granted, that was going into this week. I feel like the Saints are going to have a bigger hit on their bus score when we were looking into week 13. Honestly, I feel like the Lions, they're going to want to come back hard after Thanksgiving. Unfortunate for them. But I feel like the Lions might be able to pull this off, especially with Derek Carr missing, Chris Olave, and Juwan Johnson. It's going to be tough for him missing top 2 receivers on his team.
Yeah, it's going to be hard for them to clear a concussion protocol just this week and get back for this, for coming week 13 games. So yeah, the Saints they got a banged up wide receiver core. It's going to be an issue. They'll be back, but I see the Lions prevailing in this one.
And then we have the Browns-Rams. Browns lost a lot of guys this past weekend, including their QB going into concussion protocol. And Ryan, as you mentioned, Myles Garrett's shoulder injury, plus Amari Cooper's rib injury. So the Browns are getting more and more banged up. The Rams, they have their own issues with Cooper Kupp not performing at that level that we're used to seeing. Luckily, they just got Kyren Williams back. So this is an interesting game. I think the Rams probably have a little bit of the better chance here. But do you think the Browns can, pull this one out?
I don't really think the Browns have that much of a chance, honestly. Going back to the bus score, going into week 12, they were bottom of the league with 56.2, where the Rams were at 66.4. Obviously, those will change going into week 13, but it doesn't look like it's getting better for the Browns and the Rams. They got Kyren Williams back, and he had a great game considering that he just came off of IR. Hopefully Cooper Kupp can start to hit his stride again and really start being that force on the offensive side of the ball for the Rams. But I'm overall definitely taking the Rams on this game.
All right, everyone. Well, thanks for listening. Follow all the updates at thepredictors.com. It's changing rapidly. We're getting into the really exciting part of the season when health really matters. Players and teams got to stay healthy for them to perform. Follow us on social media and check us out again at thepredictors.com.